Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Tammy Dorr, President and CEO of the Downtown Denver Partnership and co-chair of Denver Startup Week. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of Denver Startup Week. DSW has been the catalyst for lots of change over the past decade. And this week, we're coming together to celebrate the past and dream big for the future. We are able to bring Denver Startup Week to this community thanks to our 2021 sponsors. Thank you to our HQ and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors whose leadership makes this week come to life. Capital One Cafe, Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork. And our track sponsors who have made all of the great content you're hearing today possible, our founder track sponsor, Kickstart, growth track sponsor, Friday Health Plans, developer track sponsor, Quizlet, product track sponsor, Palantir, our designer track sponsor, Battery 621, and the Public Works, people track sponsor, Exactly, and spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement to the week. Thank you to B-Side Fund, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pi Insurance, Promontory Mortgage, Path, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors, all listed on the screen. Please say thank you to these companies as you enjoy our hybrid Denver Startup Week. And don't forget, use the hashtag DenStartupWeek to share your experiences and moments of inspiration on social media. Have a great week.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm John, the Spotlight Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Before we get started, the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee acknowledges Indigenous people as the original owners of the land on which we reside, which is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide, ethnic cleansing, stolen land, forced removal, forced occupation of their territory. And we honor those who have stewarded this land throughout generations and all other indigenous tribes and nations who call Colorado home. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, or the combination of those identities. There is something for everyone at DSW. Thanks to all of our community members who submitted their best content to make this week what it is. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us keep DSW free and accessible for all, especially our Spotlight Track sponsor, Strat Labs. With that, please enjoy this session and the entire week.
All right, here we are. Welcome, everyone. That was great. I love Denver Startup Week. I'm so excited that it's actually happening. I'm actually headed down to Denver in person. I'm doing another event this evening. Actually, if you're around, it's with Kwame Spearman from Tattered Cover, who's also a sponsor of Denver Startup Week, on a similar topic, actually. And we will be live at the Denver Pavilion, the main event center. That's at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Be good to actually see people in person. Happy to get out from behind the Zoom. So we've got a great session today. This is a really important topic. I'm here with Makisha Boothe from Sistahbiz, and I'll have her introduce herself in just a second. But what we want to talk with you all about is some changes that are taking place in the landscape of entrepreneurship in the United States that a lot of people really aren't noticing. I co-wrote a book that was released in May called The New Builders, and it described these changes and what's going on in the entrepreneurial landscape. And Denver Startup Week is in particular focused on technology startups, right? You could see that in the list of sponsors, and you can obviously see it in terms of the events that are taking place. And that's that's appropriate in the sense that, you know, Denver is a hot startup market for technology businesses. But one of the things I think that sometimes gets lost in that narrative, and really was the focus of the book that Elizabeth McBride and I wrote, is that entrepreneurship exists in a much broader context, right? Most businesses actually aren't technology businesses, and that's created some challenges because we're not doing a very good job of supporting entrepreneurs outside of the technology sphere. And perhaps as a result of that, entrepreneurship in the United States is actually in a profound state of decline. And this is something that was surprising to me. It's been surprising as we've shared the results of our research and our work with other people. Because we don't see that in the tech world, right? Tech's on fire, it seems like. But the truth is, broadly speaking, and broadly is important because 99% of businesses don't take money from people like me, venture capitalists, that businesses are actually struggling. And interestingly, we're seeing a real shift in terms of the people that are starting businesses today. And so, you know, many people, if you kind of step back and think about a typical startup founder, we'll think of someone maybe who looks more like me, right, or younger than me, but looks more like me. And the truth is, meaning white and male, and that's true in technology. And we can talk about some things we can and should be doing to help diversify the pipeline in tech as well. But actually, if you look broadly at people that are starting businesses, they don't look like me at all. In fact, women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. Black women specifically are the fastest group of people starting businesses. I don't think we do a great job of supporting entrepreneurs broadly and Black women entrepreneurs specifically, but also other women that are starting businesses and other people of color that are starting businesses, who together are the majority of new business owners. In fact, white males are the minority of business owners in the United States today. And that's where Makisha comes in. And I met Keisha, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, through some of the work that I was doing when Elizabeth and I were researching the new builders. And there's such important work being done in areas really all across the country. I love, of course, just because I'm so passionate about Colorado. I love that Keisha is here doing this work in Colorado, though her network is national. So I wanted to have an opportunity to kind of talk about that and talk about why this work is so important, how we all can do a better job of supporting new builders, of supporting grassroots entrepreneurs, of supporting Main Street businesses, beyond just sort of shop local and other things that are important, but are just a step, right? We don't always provide the same resources, not just in terms of capital, but also in terms of help and mentorship to businesses outside of the technology world. And we can do a better job at that. And Keisha is a great example of someone putting a network together to do exactly that, to bring money and to bring other resources together to support, in her case, Black women founders. So with that, Keisha, we'll do sort of a Q&A style. We've done this a couple of times. So, yeah. But why don't you start by just kind of introducing, you've got such a fascinating background. I think the story of how you came to start Sistahbiz is really interesting. So maybe kind of just take us through a little bit about your history and then how Sistahbiz came into being.
Sure. Thanks, Seth, for you're an influential leader in our community, and you could choose to use your influence in any way that you want. And you chose to use it to shine a light on this cause, to be the voice of the unheard in entrepreneurship. And so thank you for that. And thank you for including me on your journey. But Sistahbiz Global Network has been in operation officially since 2018. But my journey started, I'll just kind of break down my journey without telling a deep story of all the elements of my journey that contributed to the startup of Sistahbiz. And so first and foremost, I am the Sistahbiz member that I served. I was a small business owner in a small brick and mortar in Cherry Creek, and then in the Golden Triangle, who was bootstrapping, who had no family members who had given me exposure to entrepreneurship. So, and with very little social capital to understand and know how to run and grow a profitable and scalable venture. I was running a small day spa. I was 24. I had $5,000 in startup capital and a clientele that I had built from working at other spas in the neighborhood. And the story from there was that, we struggled for a few years and eventually closed, but it was one of the biggest learning experiences of my life. From there, I went on to do work in politics, worked for 3 Senate presidents in a row at the state capitol and then in DC for former Senate President Peter Groff when he went there. And through that work, I became very passionate about policy and politics in underserved communities and in the Black community. And so I have that history of advocacy, politics, and policy. Went on to work for the Denver Public Schools and launched and designed their first innovation lab. And in that work, I was formally trained in adult learning and curriculum design, as well as in design thinking, traveled the country looking at different innovation labs to build their lab, and IDEO and other folks like that, Lighthouse Innovation Center for Lockheed Martin, those sorts of things. And so became very passionate about rapid improvement and curriculum design and adult learning. And so when I got fired from a 6-figure job, I decided I was never going to work for anyone again. It was very traumatic because some of the things that happened were rooted in racist structures. And as a result, I decided I just wanted to do my own thing and really wanted to build something of my own in a safe space for myself, which I did and was pretty successful by my terms. I was a single mom and I went to 6 figures in year 1 as a consultant, and others had heard about that in the area, started reaching out and asking for coffee, letting me know that they had experienced similar trauma in the workplace and wanted to get out on their own, and could I help them? So I started coaching a couple of women, just labor of love, volunteer, because they could not afford market rate prices for business coaching, out of my home. And 2 people grew to 10, and 10 grew to 50, and 50 grew to 150. And here we are today with group coaching and training and programs, a cohort program, a 9-month cohort program, a technical assistance and back office clinic, a loan fund, a grant fund. We've given away hundreds of thousands of dollars in services and grants and loans, almost $1 million. And we grew from Colorado based to a national following. We're in 20 states, London and Canada. And it's a sisterhood, it's a community where Black women feel understood and validated, a space for healing as much as it is a space for wealth building and growth.
I love it. There's so much here to get into. In case it's not clear, by the way, I'm going to use a term. The foreword of the book was written by Tyra Banks, and she titled it "Own Your Fierce Power." And when I hear Keisha talk, I think of the word fierce. Like Makisha is a fierce woman. And I think that shows in the success and the perseverance. There's a lot to talk about here. Let's start with just a couple of stories. I mean, one of the things that I think we tried to do in the book itself, and I think is just really helpful, is to bring some stories to life. And so there's lots of facts and stuff like that and figures in the book, but we also tell the stories of new builders because we feel like that's the way to make it real. And there are so many compelling women that are part of the Sistahbiz network. Maybe just pick 1 or 2 and just kind of describe the business and maybe kind of where they came from, just to give people a sense for the types of businesses that you work with.
Sure. So we have 2 streams, main streams that we work with. We work with retail product-based businesses, and then we also work with service-based businesses. And our primary work is to help them move from B2C to either B2B or B2G, business to government, so that they can land larger deals and wholesale accounts and that sort of thing. And so a couple examples are Kalia Sanders-Wright. So she was she had a social media agency. It was her side hustle. She was bringing in a couple thousand a month while working her full-time job. And she started coaching with us, and she was trying to figure out how to take her job full-time. And we began the coaching process, and uncovered, sort of that she had a really solid opportunity to leave her 9-to-5 and grow a scalable business. And so we started the work, and I would say it was probably about August of last year. And in December, we have an annual retreat called Goal Digger, where it's a two-day planning retreat for solopreneurs and micro teams to come and build their strategic plan for the year. And she told her boss that she wanted to be allowed to have the time off to come to Goal Digger, and they wouldn't give it to her. So she quit. And so she called me and she was like, yeah, my boss said I couldn't come to Goal Digger. And I was like, oh, dang. And she was like, so I quit. And I was like, whoa, everybody calm down. And she was like, no, I feel really secure about the plan we've built. I'm going for it. She has 2 kids and a family, and to take care of. And so, and really the thing was that when I looked at her numbers and I looked at what she was making in her 9-to-5, I was like, well, if the first step is usually like, how can I at least make what I'm making in my 9-to-5 predictably and consistently, because then I can leave the 9-to-5. And then how can I grow this into something that affords me the lifestyle that I want for my family and the generational legacy that I want? And I could see clearly that she wasn't far from that if she just organized her business right. And so she did. She came to Goal Digger. She was all in. I want to talk about that concept of all in later. And in January, she relaunched. And by the end of the first quarter, she had made $60K just for the quarter, which was what she was making less than that in her full-time job for the year. So now she is well on the pathway to mid 6 figures. And this is all in a year and a half. Diane Miles is another example. And I wish she was here to tell her story as well, but she is a single mom. She's a local leader here in Denver, but she started her journey of moving into that space. She runs a company called Dope Mom Life. It's a diversity company that helps agencies build media and video and use video to connect with underserved communities that they serve. And she was building it. I remember her being really clear on her vision, and other people didn't believe in her vision. And that's one of the things that happens when women come to me. Like, I can see what they can see, and that's refreshing to them, because as an entrepreneur, sometimes you have an idea and other people shoot it down or don't understand it, and you almost can't tell anybody as a result, because you don't want them to ruin your enthusiasm, your energy, and you putting that in the universe. So we started working together, but she was in a really dire state financially and with her family on the beginning. And now she has investors. She has a full team, executive leadership, COO. She's crossing the 7-figure line this year. Again, that was a 2-year journey. And Keisha Mathis launched Herbal Honey. Make sure you guys go see her at the farmers markets here in Colorado. And she tripled her revenue from, just building systems for scale for her farmers market business. And so those are the stories of success in terms of their revenues, but the bigger story is about what changed inside of them, what changed in their mindset, how they decided that they could do anything. And that even though the systems that you talk about in the new builders of the economy are not built for their success, they take it. And they just need someone to help them with a roadmap, and who has a network, because that's really where the secret sauce is, right? Who you know, and how to get to resources, how to get to information. It's all relationship built, and you have to really cross some cultural bridges that, are not comfortable or not easy to cross in order to get that network. So you have to do a lot more work than your white counterpart to build those types of relationships, because you're not at those tables. But they do all of that work, and they build, and they are new builders, and they are, leading the way. And I just want to do that with hundreds of women every year.
Yeah, and to emphasize that point, Keisha, there was some research that we came across that suggested that it takes a black woman 8 times the number of meetings to get the result, either business development or capital raising, than it does a white male counterpart. So these systems are very much stacked against people of color. We'll get into some other ways that they are as well. But I think, it's so important to understand these stories. One of the things that I think is pernicious about this sort of like tech takeover of entrepreneurship, it is this idea that entrepreneurs fit a certain mold, right? And I think one of the things that has happened over the last, 100 years in our country is that entrepreneur used to describe really anyone. The entrepreneur, the root of entrepreneur, comes from a French word that means to undertake, right? To endeavor, to try something. And we go through kind of the history of it in the book, because the etymological history of the word is actually kind of interesting, and how and when it started to be used. But 100 years ago described really anyone who was starting a business, right? Someone on the corner shop, someone who ran a corner shop, the local farrier, who rehooved your horses. I mean, that's what entrepreneur meant. And then sometime in the sort of like 80s and 90s, it stopped meaning that, and it started just meaning technology startup founder. And if there's any takeaway for this group, because we're in a position of power, all of us who are listening to this, it's to like stop that BS, right? Because the truth is, you take power from someone if they don't see themselves as part of this group. And actually many new builders that we talked to in writing the book didn't think of themselves as entrepreneurial. They didn't think of themselves as entrepreneurs. Part of why we labeled them new builders was because we wanted to give them agency. But that agency also comes from being an entrepreneur. And the women that Keisha works with, and all of the stories she just described, I mean, this is entrepreneurial as it gets, right? I mean, I love the story of, I've heard it a couple of times of, like, hey, I can't go to this event, so I'm just going to quit my job. And that way I can go. Like, that's as entrepreneurial as it gets. And I think that I would encourage everyone listening to this session to be thoughtful about that, and to not, we don't own that word in Silicon Valley and technology startups, right? That's not our word. That was a word that Ronald Reagan decided that he wanted to use in his effort to promote capitalism, and sort of as the Cold War was raging, and he actually grabbed it. Obviously, he witnessed that as governor of California. He grabbed that, and in the 80s started describing entrepreneurs and this, what he called this special class of entrepreneurs, these technology startup founders. And he used that as a way to differentiate capitalism and capitalist systems from communism. And that was why it started to get eaten up by Silicon Valley originally, and now tech entrepreneurship more broadly. So let's not let it do that. I think that's a mistake.
We need to take that word back. We need to take back entrepreneurship. And I always like to use the analogy of this unicorn analogy. Like it's annoying that we put so much energy into the unicorn. What does the unicorn do in the ecosystem? First of all, it doesn't even exist. Second of all, it says uni in the word. It's one. It's all about self. We need to be about bees, and we need to be about beavers. We need bees because they cross-pollinate, they pollinate, they contribute to the entire ecosystem. We need beavers because they regulate the ecosystem. That's what our new builders are. That's what our small businesses are. That's what's being killed when we focus on the unicorn and over-focus on it. It's not that they're not necessary or not a part of the ecosystem, but when we hyper-focus on them and invest only in them, we are killing the rest of the ecosystem.
I love that. I'm going to start using that, Keisha. I've been one of my favorite entrepreneurs is a guy building the African Leadership College, Fred Swaniker, who's a friend of mine, and he described them as camels, right? We don't need more unicorns. We need camels, hardy workhorses of the economy. And I like bees better because I think it's a better analogy. But I think that's so important, right? We get so obsessed with these these businesses that have this huge scale potential. But the truth is that the vast majority of venture-backed businesses fail. 66% of venture rounds fail to return the capital that was invested in them. So, that works in the venture model because you have a couple of companies, whether they're true unicorns or not, that grow really big. But as a broad-based economic development system, it's not particularly effective, right? We need more businesses, more bees to be successful. And I think that's critically important. And that's why this work is so important. Keisha, I wanted to touch on something that you described. You described it as part of your personal history, but it was something that we heard over and over again when we talked to other new builders. And that was specifically that, and I think this is maybe a little bit of why Black women in particular are starting their own businesses at such a high rate. And that's because they face systemic racism and other challenges in the sort of the mainstream workforce, if you will. And you describe that, and I want to touch on it and ask you a little bit more about that, both for yourself, but for other women that you work with, because I think it's an underappreciated reason why so many people of color generally, women more generally, and Black women more specifically, are starting their own businesses because they face these biases in their day jobs, and they're like, hey, I'm sick of this, I'm going to go do it myself.
Yeah, that's definitely my story, and that's the story of most of the women in our community, which is why we have every month we have Black Girl Therapy sessions, because you need a place to go and talk about it so that you're not feeling gaslit, like what you're experiencing isn't real. You come to our place and we let you know, not only is it real, it's wrong, and all of us are going through it. And that in and of itself is healing, that sets the stage for you to do bigger and better things for yourself. So yeah, workplace trauma rooted in racism. So racial trauma in the workplace is very real. Disparities, gender discrimination in the workplace is very real. Anti-Blackness in the workplace and in our community and environment is very real. And so when you're in a larger mainstream institution, it can literally really take down your health. I remember gaining like 25 pounds, going through stuff, and my doctor saying, so you want to take a look at this job? Because it's really impacting you. And nothing's being done about it in most places. It's just usually just a lot of talk around, fixing it. And so you want out, you want to figure something else out, you want to save yourself. And that's what you see women doing. That's the first reason. But then the second thing is, the fact of the matter is most of our businesses are side hustles to make ends meet. And if you look at the pay equity gaps, we're the lowest on the totem pole as Black women. And so often we do these things to make ends meet, and we still keep the 9-to-5 job. Just to make ends meet. And so a lot of the growth in businesses, I believe, is connected to that as well.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think there's a couple things there that I think are important to highlight. One of which is just so in the interviews that we did, someone said something to me that I guess I understood it, but it to hear it so directly really affected me, which is that she said, we as Americans, we have a history of not valuing the labor of Black people and Black women specifically, right? And we don't trust Black women. And I thought about that a lot. This was a Black woman who said this to me. And I think it's absolutely true. I mean, of course, I'm aware of the 400 years of systemic racism that has existed in the United States, obviously. And we've only just, by the way, crossed over the number of years that Black people have not been slaves. Like, we've just hit the mark where they were they've not been, we've not enslaved them. And I hate even describing it, but it is not as far in our history as we think it is. And by the way, it is. I've been reading a bunch of history books. I read the Hamilton biography, and I was reading something on Washington, and it just, it was more, I always understood it, but I didn't quite understand. And maybe it's just because it's more, it had been 20 or 30 years since I'd been thinking about that history so specifically, but just how intertwined slavery was with sort of early American systems. We talk a little bit about it in a chapter we wrote on the history of America and American entrepreneurship, but I don't know that I think if I could rewrite that again, I would have written the section on the role of slavery. We wrote about it, but I would have made it a lot longer, because it's just really jarring. And I think it's something to think about. But it's this notion of trust also that I thought was really interesting, that and I think it's something to think about as we think about our role as investors, our role as supporters, right? How do we help lift people up? By trusting them, right? By giving them agency. And so I'll stop there, but it's just so critically important. Well, let's talk about resources, because I think that's another thing that, you guys have done a great job with at Sistahbiz, but that I think people don't often sort of recognize. I think people realize there's a gap in terms of wealth in America, but I think what they don't always realize is that gap exists across every socioeconomic, meaning education level, every socioeconomic level, meaning every sort of current dollar value to current income level. So I'm not saying that very eloquently, but there's this 10x income gap, right, between Black people and Black families and white families, right? There's a 7x income gap between Hispanic families and white families, and that exists at every income level. So if you make 100 grand or you make 300 grand, there's still this gap. And it exists at every educational attainment level of head of household. And so when it comes to thinking about how to fund a business, it is much harder for people of color, for Black women in particular, to rely on friends and family, to rely on their own resources, to rely on home equity lines and things like that, because there is this massive wealth gap as a result of 400 years of systemic racism in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about just access to capital and how people how the women that you work with are able to get funding? And then I want to talk, maybe we'll do that, but I do want to talk about, like, how do we start changing that?
Yeah. So I'll start with the current sort of state and reality. And I mean, you talked earlier about a Black woman having to take on 8 more meetings than, her white counterpart when trying to pursue capital and resources for her business. And I think it's important to note that that's stacked on top of the fact that she started with less than her white counterpart. So we have the family and friends wealth that and that's anything from an insurance policy that got paid out because one of your ancestors left it to you, or a home that you can draw equity on, or money in the bank, or a parent or relative that gives you money, or friends that are wealthy. Well, Black community is less likely to have any of that. So you take a Black woman who's not starting with any of that. She's starting with the skills that she has, and she's starting with a dream, and she's starting with grit, but not resources, not money, and not the social network. So she's not at a table where wealth is and where wealth is distributed. And so if you take that she's starting there, and then you tack onto it the fact that she now has to go through 8 times as many meetings as her white counterpart. So I'm looking at a runway right now in my mind. They both started building their business together, a white person and a Black person. And I started off with less than you did. And now I have to go further than you do to even get to the funding that I need. And then when I finally land the funding that I need, it's going to be a fraction of what you were trusted with, because you probably have relationships and because you're not a victim of racist systems. And so then I have to build with what I have. I'm technically starting later than you because it took me longer to get what I needed to really build. I'm working with less than you are, so I don't really have the full capacity to scale. And it's why you see the disparity you see. So that's
Absolutely.
why we created loan funds, grant funds, but also do work around trying to connect our folks with the social capital that they need that leads to funding and resources as well.
Let's talk about the loan fund, the grant fund, but then also the loan preparedness work that you all do, and just in general, like, how do businesses access capital? And it's worth sort of framing this discussion a little bit. I made mention of the 1%. 1% of businesses take money from venture capitalists or similar sources, but actually only about 17% take money from banks. So over 80% of businesses are left to fend for themselves, and this is where the racial wealth gap is particularly pernicious, because the vast majority of businesses are funded via home equity lines, friends and family, other sources of capital. That's 80% of companies, and so. It's important to work on both ends there, but it's also important to recognize that there's a huge gap in the middle that we need to figure out how to better support and better fund. But talk a little bit about the work that you do to help the women that you work with be more prepared to take on capital from different sources, and some of the work that you've done thinking through other forms and other sources of capital that might be brought to bear to help fund those businesses, particularly the early stage.
Yeah, so 2 areas, sort of like loan or capital readiness, and then growth readiness. So really helping them build strategies for growth, because their mindset is not in the growth phase because they don't have resources for growth. Their mindset is, 1, how do I stay open and survive? how do I, build a business that can be built on the limited amount of resources that I have? And that usually means that I'm going to be a solopreneur, or I'm going to be a very tiny micro business. That's really all I have the resources for. And so when a lot of people say that you see these businesses and they're not prepared for growth, well, why would I prepare for something I don't have resources for? And when you looked at the pandemic and we started working with a bunch of women and helping them get accounting services, we had Black women accountants come in and do their PL statements, their balance sheets, help them with their taxes, help them. And we had with their business model structure, cost structures and revenue models, and build their business plans out. And when we were talking to a lot of some of the brick and mortar businesses about why their numbers weren't in, the record keeping wasn't really supporting their ability to access capital. For instance, a small example is like, why would I report certain income if I need that income to thrive? And it's because I'm not set up to grow. I'm just set up to survive. So I organize my money structures and my revenue structures to survive. But if you tell me I have the opportunity to open 4 or 5 more locations of my business, if I just create growth strategies and I have to have my revenue model and my bookkeeping aligned to be able to report that income to make that happen, because somebody actually is going to give me capital to grow, then I'm going to reorganize in service of growth. But when I'm stunted and there's a cap, and I have no resources, I'm going to organize with what I have for where I'm trying to go or where I feel I can go. And so I think that's really important. We work with them to first find the doors that or kick through the doors that they can get through to get to the resources to grow and scale. But then it also means that we have to help them think through and envision something that they didn't give themselves permission to envision, because they didn't have the resources to envision. So it's a lot of work around growth strategies. What does growth and scale look like? What does it look like to go from B2C to B2B or B2G? What does it look like to build a team and be able to pay them market rate salaries and competitive salaries? What does it look like to get ready for mass production, get a commercial facility for production or for manufacturing or a brick and mortar space? All these things are things that take resources. So when you know clearly that you've either tried or everyone else around you has tried and you're not getting those resources, you're not going to plan for those things. So we create the space for you to plan for those things and manifest it and find the resources to build it. So that's what our scale readiness and loan readiness work looks like. It looks like visioning and planning and design, business model canvassing and design, but then also credit repair, accounting services, all the things you need to get ready to grow.
You said something to me a few months ago, I'm sure you'll remember when I say it, but that really stuck with me, which you just described, but it really encapsulates this challenge, which is, you said, if you give someone a little bit of money, you force them to think little, because they're thinking about the next thing. How do I make payroll? What's my next, how do I spend $100 on marketing? If you give people a lot of money, you allow them, or more money, you allow them to think bigger, right? And so one of the things that you're describing is this challenge of how do you start that process of thinking bigger earlier, because that's what opens people's minds, right? I mean, they are by resource constraining people, we are constraining their ability to think about their business. Think about their business broadly, right? I mean, the median amount of money raised by a Black female founder in 2018, so the last year that I have numbers for, was 0. Median amount was 0. And so, you're, by definition, you're constrained when you have 0 capital, right? I mean, I think everyone can understand that and think about why that's such a challenge. And the truth is, I mean, a lot of the work that you do on loan preparedness is really important, because we know that the banking system is biased. And actually, there's another Colorado connection. One of the main researchers that the Fed hired to actually study this, there's some really good reports on it, is Alicia Robb from Boulder, who went through and really showed that people of color, broadly speaking, not just Black women, but people of color and women and white women, they apply for lower loan amounts, they get rejected more frequently, they pay higher rates, and they receive a lower portion of the money that they're requesting than their white male counterparts, when holding all other factors constant. So it's harder out there. And by the way, it's getting even harder, because one of the things that's been challenging in our banking system that we also write about in the book is that there's this massive consolidation taking place. There were 14,000 banks in the United States 20 years ago. Today, there are fewer than 4,500. Most of that consolidations happen at the smaller end of the banking system.
Exactly.
In fact, the top 4 banks control 80% of US deposits. Now, some of those banks, including JP Morgan Chase, who's one of the sponsors here, are actually doing pretty good work trying to diversify their loan pipelines. But the truth is that a lot of money that goes into diverse communities, and in particular rural communities, again, important for Colorado more broadly, happens from community banks and from CDFIs, which are the community finance development institutions. And that's where a lot of the consolidation is taking place. And so I think it's important to recognize how challenging that is. And frankly, ways to support community banks. I'm working on some legislative ways to support community banks, but for those of you on this call that have an interest, I mean, just simply depositing money in a community bank is a good way to help enable loans, because there's about a 10-to-1 ratio. $1 for every dollar that gets deposited, about $10 gets loaned out sort of over the cycle. And so that's not a bad way to do something, right? So, put $10,000 into a savings account at a community bank, and $100,000 gets lent, and it tends to go to more diverse founders and to more diverse geographic as well founders. So I think that's really important. Let's talk about access to mentorship and kind of, obviously you do that work directly, right? You're working with companies and helping them with your own network and with your own resources. But what are some of the ways that you're helping businesses, get plugged into broader networks, or what are some of the things that you'd like to see changed about, even like the Denver ecosystem, right? We think of ourselves as Give First and all these other things, but that seems to be limited into a pretty narrow set of businesses. How do we broaden our thinking around that?
Yeah, so I think before I move into that, I want to do a selfish plug for a new spreadsheet that I created called Pay It Forward. I modeled it after another larger one that was going around the nation, but I centered it around Denver, Colorado, where white allies from corporations and businesses can sign up to do 20-minute consultations with Black business owners in our network. And so I'll share the link to that. And all you have to do is sign up, put your Calendly link in there, and we distribute it to our network, and you put your areas of expertise, and then they can reach out and schedule an appointment and just get consultation. I think we overthink that stuff sometimes. I think that we overthink mentorship programs sometimes. There is an intentionality that needs to be behind it, but sometimes you have to do things and just get started, and other people will get on the train eventually who need to be on the train. And so for me, it was like, I'm going to put the spreadsheet together, and I'm going to put the 20-minute consultation links in there, and just make yourself available. I have 2 mentors right now who are white men who are multimillionaires who have bought and sold multiple companies. And no, we didn't have anything structured or formal. Someone just connected us, and they want to be in the room with me, and they want to give me information I didn't have, and they want to look at my documents, and they make the time. And it's been so valuable to me. And I've even called you and Brad, and you all have always returned the call. And even if it's 15 minutes, it's usually like 15 really valuable minutes of me getting information that I need to move my business forward. That's what I want for all of our women to start with. So very basically, just be there and offer the inside track. Be there and let us know where mistakes are being made, or where we can make improvements on the things that we need to send out to, access capital and the resources we need. So I just want to start with that, like simple, like it is not that complicated to first just start building relationships and just offer support, guidance, bring people to the tables that you're at. That doesn't, if everybody just did a little bit of that, a little bit more, we would go a lot farther. But then there is, on my side, a desire to train the women that I work with to make the most of mentorship. And then I often get called in to talk to corporations and organizations who have mentors, to talk to them about how to build their own knowledge base around culturally competent practices and relationship building, so that they can come to the table in a way that is not traumatizing to the people that they work with as much as possible. And it's a work in progress for everybody to learn how to build these cross-cultural bridges, but you got to start somewhere. You got to be committed, not just interested. And so that means that you have to move through discomfort when it happens. And you have to do your work on both sides. That knowledge building around cultural responsiveness, that healing work around trauma, racial trauma. And like you said, Seth, you read all this history, and now you can make these connections between the very real things we have going on with racism and this injustice today with slavery, because it's not that far away. But a lot of people don't get that, and they don't understand it. And there's a apathy and a disbelief and a lack of knowledge that can sometimes be damaging emotionally when you're working with a person of color who is experiencing you. And so it does require that you do some work, but I'm saying that if you just bring two people together and they both come with the best of intentions and put in the work to just be supportive and helpful, you can work through those things by building a relationship. It's about relationship building. I've had a lot of companies ask me about trust, like, how can we build trust? And it's like, stop trying to, or it's not how can we build? That's actually the right question. It's like, can we trust each other to move forward? You know, you start a project and you start building the values for the project, and trust is always in there. And it's like, but trust is earned. And in fact, you're going, you know, like our runway is unfair. The trust runway right now for Blacks and whites is such that I have no reason to trust you. The history shows that my community has commonly, consistently been, you know, lost that trust, been burned by that trust, been betrayed, been hurt. And it's not just, you know, a situation with a relationship. It's like murder. It's like our people have died. Our people have been enslaved. Our people have, that stuff, it has broken trust in a way that it would take generations to rebuild that trust. And so you can't expect it to come overnight, but you can do like my mother says, which she always says, I can show you better than I can tell you. You can show up, you can do better. And over time that gets, their healing comes in, and the trust comes. Seth, you said something to me about a year ago that was very healing for me. It's what you said today when you were like, I just want to acknowledge that Black women are, you know, misunderstood and under mistreated and undervalued in this country. And it was one of the most healing conversations I've had during this Black Lives Matter time that we're in. It literally sent me to bed sleeping better that night, because there was something that got lifted that day. And I feel like those one-on-one conversations matter. So if you want to think about how to start something, it doesn't always have to be scalable. Harriet Tubman did not scale shit. She took 10 people across the line every week, and she never lost a passenger. And she's one of the greatest heroes in American history. Sometimes you got to start with what you got and do what you can.
Love that. It's, well, one, thank you. And two, I think that last point is so important, right? I think one of the other things that the tech business has you know, not contributed in a negative way to sort of the entrepreneurial narrative is this notion of like scale is the only thing that matters, right? And oftentimes that's not the case. And not only is it not the case, many times it's like the opposite of what businesses should do, right? We've lost this notion that like having a business that scales to a point where you make more than you were making before, and you can support your employees and your family and lifestyle, and it grows a little bit every year, like that can be great. You don't necessarily need to start a store and think, you know, the first question shouldn't be, hey, when are you going to franchise, right? When are you going to open 10 more stores? Like maybe the question is, what's the next thing you're going to do that, you know, with your family, right? Or how are you going to use this opportunity to continue to fulfill what is most important to you, which isn't necessarily, you know, having 20 more stores that look just like this one and you know, working 800 hours a week or whatever. I also want to circle back on something else that you said, Keisha, because I think this is really important. And I've experienced this. Like I have had a very comfortable life, right? I'm as privileged as it gets. I'm white, I'm male, I'm well-to-do. And, you know, I mean, I worked for it, but I also came from a relatively privileged background, right? I mean, I was able to go to college and my parents were professionals, and, you know, I didn't have like crazy debts and things like that. And I, over the last couple of years, because I was researching the book and I was just very deliberately spending time. And it wasn't that I didn't have friends of color or also, I had lots of, I felt like very diverse relationships, but I spent a huge amount of time leaning into that part of my network that didn't look at all like me. And the result was a lot of very uncomfortable moments, right? Where I was out of my element, where I was the minority on in rooms or on Zooms after we all went back into our houses. And I'm encouraging people to get out of their comfort zone and to experience that discomfort, because I actually think it's really helpful. And you're going to mess up a little bit. I've said some things that were not quite right, and I've had friends correct me sometimes in real time, once in front of a group of a couple hundred people, like, hey, I didn't like the way you said that. And we worked through it live, and I think it ended up being a good example of how you can take feedback and it's okay. Like I obviously wasn't intending that, but now I know, right? And I won't, right. There was a term I used or something, some phraseology I used that was not, that wasn't the right way to say it. And it's like, okay, that's okay. I think people are so afraid of being uncomfortable or just being wrong that they're not willing to open themselves up to that. So I want to reinforce that, because I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. I do want to talk a little bit about, and it kind of dovetails to this, Keisha, like the people that are listening here, what are some things that they can do to be helpful, right? I think like a lot of people, if you'd asked me like 3 or 4 years ago, I thought there was sort of a continuum, and the continuum was, racist, not racist. And then there was this like really big sort of gray area in the middle where you were like not hurting or helping. And now I realize there's actually no middle. Like there's just a line and you're on one side of it or the other. There's a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's a great way. It describes this in detail, and really was sort of a big epiphany for me as I read that a couple years ago, to think about this. And so I believe that one needs to do more than just not do harm, because that's not the right side of the line, right? So I think that if there's sort of a call to action here, it's for people to get involved and to be more positive. But Keisha, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on, I know you're going to send around the spreadsheet. I think that is a great way for people to get involved. But what are some other things that people can do if they want to be on the right side of that line and not in this gray area that turns out it doesn't exist?
Yeah, so I went on a trip with the Denver leadership delegation at the chamber this past weekend, and they had Dr. Tatum, Beverly Daniel Tatum, come, and she wrote the book, Why Are All the Kids Sitting Together, and the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria. And she used an analogy that everyone on the trip seemed to really, really love and connect to and relate to in this regard. And she talked about when you get on a walking escalator, not a stair one, but a walking escalator at the airport, and how if you consider that the system's running, that if you get on it and you're going forward, that you are actually supporting that system, you're continuing that system. The only way for you to break the system or do something to get off of that track is to turn the other way and go against the system on the escalator. And so you can't actually, even if you stop moving, meaning I'm not doing anything to hurt anything, you're still going forward with the system. And so she used that analogy, and it made everyone see that like it's important to actively work against the systems that are in place in order to contribute to them, or else you are just perpetuating and contributing to them. You are part of it. And so I think it's important to decide what you can do at given your resources, given your capacity, mental, emotional, financial, spiritual, all the things, and decide the ways in which you're going to contribute. My aunt always tells me whenever I go anywhere, I would leave the house, and even still as an adult, when I was in New York a couple of years ago, I was leaving the house to go on a service trip, and on my way out the door, it made me smile because I was 40-something years old, and she still says it. When you're leaving the house, she says, be a blessing. Like that's your charge when you go. Just be a blessing to others, and decide how you're going to be a blessing. Decide how you're going to contribute to this movement, and do it, with urgency though. Take it seriously and do it with urgency, because people are losing and dying, and the movement is real. And it really needs us to act with urgency, and silence is contributing to it. Inaction is a contribution to it. And so what that looks like for everybody has to be different. But again, I have to express the importance of not feeling like you have to do something scalable. it's a lot of internal work. Like you mentioned, Seth, you did a lot of internal work, as you were doing the other work to contribute to systems change, or to distribute resources, or to be a voice publicly for this stuff. You did a lot of internal work to understand what was happening, your place and your family and community's place in this whole discussion, and how you could be the person that would show up and do something. That internal work has to happen. It's important. And so even if you're just starting there, educating yourself, reading, support groups as an ally, reading the things that help you understand the steps to take, and positioning yourself to move your ego out of the way and accept the fact that you're coming into a place where there is hurt, there's anger, there's frustration, there's trauma. We're tired. We're tired of talking about it and telling everybody about it. And that might come out sometimes. You got to be ready for that, to receive that, because you have to know. But when you know the story, you know the history, you understand it. And so that's why doing your internal work for both knowledge-based building and preparing yourself emotionally for the journey is important. I think that's the greatest work you could do. And then beyond that, actually moving actual resources, volunteering, supporting the activities that are happening where we're getting results and seeing results and closing gaps.
I think that's the perfect place to end. I love that. Be a blessing. I think that's a great takeaway for everyone from this session. I want to thank Makisha for our friendship, for her insights, and for all the incredible work that she's doing. I would really encourage you to take a look. I'll put the link in the chat, but take a look at Sistahbiz, Sistah.biz, to learn more about what she's up to. It's really important work. It's really compelling work. And I hope you all go out and be a blessing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Seth.